Just a quick note up top. Today we are launching our first ever This Should Be a Game Jam. This is something that I've been interested in doing for a little while, and hopefully that we're going to do every sort of we have these thematic double features that we do. Would really love to end all of them with mechanical mailbag and a game jam. Because this is the first one, it's going to cover both of the themes we've done so far. So that was people having problems in space, which was Gravity, Apollo 13, and The Martian. And it's also going to be Loop in Time, which was Looper and Happy Death Day. You can make a game that is inspired by any of them, by all of them, by the conversations we've had on the show. As long as it is a TTRPG and you made it in this time frame, it isn't a game that you've published before, you can put it in there. And I'll be really excited to see it. It's starting today. It's going to go for a month. You can find it in the show notes. You can find it on our website. You can find it on our Bluesky. You can find it in our Discord. The website is thisshouldbeaga.me. That's also our username on Bluesky. You can find our Discord at discord.thisshouldbeaga.me. I'm really excited to have this as a regular thing in an ongoing way. I also just want to note that after this episode, we are going to take a little bit of a summer break. We will be back. The members of our Patreon voted for the theme of our next double feature, and they chose John Carpenter's horrors. So we will be back with some episodes about a couple John Carpenter movies. You can learn exactly which ones when we put out the call for the mechanical mailbag submissions. Follow us the places you follow us. You can subscribe in an RSS feed to the website. Any relevant announcements will get posted on there, either with an episode or their own post. They'll go right to your RSS feed. Shout out to RSS. What a good way to interact with the internet. Need Foley for opening the mechanical mailbag. It'd be like a zip of the mail, like a bag opening, and then I guess a bunch of tools falling out. Maybe it would sound like a toolbox getting spilled. I think that's probably how mechanics would sound. Zip. This Should Be a Game, a podcast about adaptive media and filtering 90% of your life experiences through tabletop role-playing games. This is the mechanical mailbag for Happy Death Day. So this is a feature that we are doing where we expand the conversation by inviting listeners to write in or send a little audio clip with a mechanic or a game pitch, just something small inspired by the movies that we're covering. Make sure to follow us on Bluesky at thisshouldbeaga.me or join our Discord at discord.thisshouldbeaga.me to see when we're doing those. We'll be doing them for upcoming movies because this just feels like a fun way to wrap the series up by really focusing on just wow, there are so many different ways that these games could exist. I'm Satah. You can find me on Bluesky at potatochips.gaygothvibes.online. You can find my work generally at gaygothvibes.online. Where can people find you, Jess?
I'm Jess. My pronouns are she, her, and they can find me on Bluesky as at jessfrom.online. That's also my website without the at. And you can find me on itch as jumpgategames.itch.io.
So these episodes went a little bit differently than they often do. We generally, historically, have had a much more linear progression of idea, build on idea, get deeper into it, whatever. For this one, we kind of just did two completely different games in both episodes. For me, a really big part of that was just that when we left the episode with Caleb, I didn't have those huge, obvious, open questions that I often do because I think that we did a hilariously good job at just kind of designing a pretty reasonable game experience that is pretty small scale. So it wasn't like, oh, I don't have these huge lingering, like, here's something that we need to dig down more deeply into. Obviously, that does exist. Like, that game is not finished. It is not in an extant playable state. There's a lot of development that would need to happen, but there wasn't anything that was like a glaring omission. So with Marn, we kind of just decided to expand and really, or not expand, but multiply the premise of a movie. A piece of inspiration can create many different things by just doing something completely different. So with Caleb, we came in the end to sort of a core loop of rotating protagonist and everyone's doing stuff. That is sort of the main thing that really sticks out to it for me. You have your NPCs that you're playing, you're going through your time loops, and then with Marn, the core, it went a lot of directions, but I think that by the end, the core thing was particularly about like everyone is playing someone from a slightly different time loop genre, and you're doing a bunch of two-person games that then in sort of a phase play thing, you're coming back and all of the players are having their little council and then they're going off to do whatever. And there was a bunch of like, what if you die? What if this happens? And it just like, I know that it was referenced as a pyramid scheme multiple times. So those are like two very separate things. I'm really curious if you have anything that you would suggest as like anything that ties them together. Like, what if we wanted to amalgamate those into one game? What if we were treating that as a process of like linear development? If we're going, here are the pieces that we developed for the same thing, how do they fit together?
I think in some ways, the concept, not to say that this isn't part of every TTRPG, but like in a really escalated way, they both really focus on a rotating spotlight. Mm-hmm. And in the first one, it's sort of rotating around who is playing this protagonist, and then other people are playing these people in the world. And then with Marn, it's like the protagonist of the universe is changing as you jump from game to game, rather than who is playing the protagonist of a game. And if we were to try to unite these, it becomes a little bit of what we have to unify a little bit is like what is getting passed around. And we can kind of drag either of these games in that direction. The time loop gives us a lot of options there, where like, do we have all these separate two-person games where everyone's playing the same protagonist, but in different loops? Or do we have these rotating roles at a single table where instead of having a bunch of separate two-person games, we play out the loop of genre A protagonist with everyone else at the table playing people in their world, and then the next person plays out the loop of genre B protagonist with everyone playing in this two-person world. And so the rotation provides enough commonality that it actually does, I think, map onto the other one very well. It's just a question of like what you're doing with that.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that in almost the reverse way, like adding some of the absurd maximalism of the game we talked about with Marn to the game we talked about with Caleb, like you can just, the specific thing I'm hung up on is the like recruitment of new people into the same game, which I think would be really fun to do, particularly if it's almost like, okay, you beat the, like, you can now get to the end of the courtyard without dying. You did that. Now you're going to a whole new location, which we talked about, like having people play multiple NPCs, particularly like in different locations, that kind of thing. Tying that instead to, cool, recruit somebody or text your cousin of what would happen, and bringing some of that in could also be one way of sort of like treating those as two parts of the same thing.
We had the mechanic with Caleb, right, of the like put everything in a hat, right? Everybody writes independent motivations at the beginning, and then you have to like draw your secret motivations out of a hat. What if you're not drawing your secret motivations out of a hat? You're drawing your secret motivations out of your cousin. Like, you text, everyone texts a friend and says, give me a character motivation. And then you have a collection of texts that gets assigned.
There's something so funny about just honing in on what that question would be. Like even something as vague as like, what are you doing right now? And then
Yes.
making that into a secret. Like you just text somebody like, what you up to? And they're like, I'm at work. And then you're like, okay, cool. This person's motivation is that they secretly have a retail job, but they're trying to, this is Cordelia Chase. They have a retail job, but they're pretending that they're independently wealthy. Like
Always
just,
converging on Cordelia Chase here.
yeah, the natural the carcinization of my whatever is going towards Cordelia Chase. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of really goofy stuff there.
I really do
great.
want the text message oracle to like come up in an actual thing that I finish and put out in the world now. Like it's really great.
It's one of those things that I love the idea of so much. It is also like I am not somebody who's super good at contacting people like regularly. And so I would really quickly run out of people who I could casually text.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because generally, if I'm starting a conversation, unless there's a reason to, it's a little weird because that's not a skill that I have. It is a skill that I'm working on. But I have a tendency to be like, I only kind of talk to people when I have like, either I'll share something, like I'll be like, here, look, I thought of this meme. You can have, it's a thought of you. Here you are. Or I'm like, hey, we have a goal. Let's make a plan. And so me just texting like, what's up? I think would probably have people be like, did you get hacked? Are you trying to take money from me?
Body snatch.
So, yeah. So it's really funny that it's an idea that I like so much that I also understand that I am very specifically in, I guess I could like do a variant where I like post on Bluesky.
Yes,
I could just like do a social media post and I'm like, what's everybody up to right now?
Ask a Discord server you're in.
Yeah. Yeah. Just thinking of what we talked about with Looper and games as therapeutic technique. This is specifically like game as highlighting social inadequacies that I would really like to work on.
Yeah, a game that teach you how to reach out to people.
Yeah. Well, we can try. Why not? It's worth a try.
Variations on your Discord DMs.
Speaking of reaching out to people, we have a couple of submissions from listeners about how they would gamify Happy Death Day. This first one is from Jasmine. The Firebrand structure of clearly framed scenes as mini-games is how I would approach a time loop. I would make them way more specific than usual, including dialogue, descriptions of places, etc., but we return to this specific scene again and again. Being murdered would be a scene that is less detailed, can happen at most points of the story. Maybe we collect some kind of markers as we go through the loop, unlocking new options, scenes, moves we can do to eventually break the loop. Thank you, Jasmine. This is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm also so glad that Firebrands is coming up for the billionth time, but particularly glad that Firebrands is coming up when we recorded with Caleb when he was in a height of his, I just read Firebrands and we need to talk about it, which is exciting for me because I always want to talk about it. And so I'm glad that it's coming up again. That makes me really happy. This is huge, I think. This is such a good seed to like grow something from. The thing of, I don't know if this is literally what Jasmine meant, but you could, of course, do the scenes that are very specific that you are writing as a designer. I'm also really intrigued by the version that's even more specific, where you are providing a framework for scenes that people fill in and then revisit. So as she says, like,
yes.
including dialogue, descriptions of places, etc., like having a scene framework that is like, walk into a room, somebody does something clumsy, somebody does this, and you write down, here are the events that happen in our version, and then you keep revisiting them, and that changes in some way, or you are able to, like, you're given a chance to react to each one.
It's Mad Libs. We're making you first play Mad Libs and then you live in your Mad Libs world. It's like
yeah,
you've got a scene structure. Do we have to link Mad Libs? But like, yeah, you've got like a scene structure where like, okay, this happens, a thing like this happens, and then a thing like this happens, and then a thing like this happens. And then once you've written in those things, they have to keep happening. And I think that's delightful. I really, really like that.
The other thing that I really like about this is that I think that it really implies to me that we're seeing a lot more of the just sort of average day of this person.
Yes.
Because the scene structure thing would imply to me that we are, if we're going as specific as saying like this is a college time loop or whatever, we're seeing there's a scene that is class, your first class, your second class, that kind of thing, you know, that we're seeing the lunchroom, whatever, that we're like, it forces the journey to be a little bit more meandering to the goal in a way that I think is so good, that it makes a lot of room for good characterization and role play in like, yeah, you're going to be doing these different things. You're not just necessarily running around. And I think it could be interesting to try and fit the investigation on top of it.
I'm also so like thinking about that in a Mad Libsy way, to be really fixated on that for a second. The idea of the ways that you can structure that prompts that are so fun to me, of like someone says something cringe. Someone says something revealing. Someone says something kind of pointed and mean but veiled. And as far as like how to make that fun and roleplay-y and explorative rather than you've got this paragraph laid out and now fill it all in, I'm thinking about to revisit my own work for a second. I have the high ground, and then to go farther back, one of the inspirations for I Have the High Ground was a game you and I played, or a set of games you and I played, Riley Rethel's It's Been a Long, Long Time, and It's Been a Long Time Coming, which are like prompt games where you're telling a backstory, but then we turned those prompts at the end into a like synchronous scene where each prompt is what's the next line of dialogue that you do. Like, here is a prompt, how are you feeling about blank? Cool, then our next few lines of like dialogue and scene description became something that conveys the idea in that prompt. It becomes something where you can read that out of it, or the character is thinking about that prompt or anything like that.
Which, just to put it in contrast, in the game Rules as Written, I believe it is a series of scenes.
Yes, yeah,
right?
A series of
like,
separate scenes.
The backstory is, like, the whole game is scenes prompted by cards, but you are collecting specific cards to play at the end. They are specific prompts about, like, when you finally meet, and then you are doing backstory and scenes in the specific thing, but we did it more like as one conversation, right?
Yes, and also the way it's structured, I don't think it necessarily, like, just in terms of how you play it, it can be a little more like almost world-building game-y, where you're answering, okay, so when we do come together, answer this question about what it was like.
Yeah.
That isn't necessarily play out what it was like, which is something I always remember because Riley has talked to me multiple times about hating doing dialogue and hates role-playing dialogue, and so a lot of her games really give you permission to like just be like, well, then this kind of thing happens in this situation. And so, but the idea of specifically, you've got a Firebands-y minigame structure, and it's like, okay, now say something cringe. And then you do that, and it's like, okay, now, and whether this is random or like always structured, now make fun of them. And so you get this like micro prompt that structures the next little bit of that conversation, and then the things that happen there become things that can be revisited. Is really fun to me.
Which is like how a conversation over dinner works, for instance. Like, it's, I make a social blunder, do you X or Y kind of thing. So like that type of prompting is already there in the structure, I would say.
Not having read Firebands in like 6 years.
But the like making like codifying it, actually like etching it in and then returning to it is really interesting. The next thing for me in this structure would be to narrow down, like, is this a group game? What are people doing? Is this another rotating protagonist situation? Is this a multiple protagonist situation where like multiple people are looping, or like is it a solo game? One of the things that's interesting to me about this is that I think taking the Firebrand structure but making it explicitly solo, when Firebrands is one of those games that is the game GMs for you type of GM-less game, which means it's really easy in a lot of ways to transport into solo frameworks. And so this could be really interesting as a solo game where you are building your scenes and then finding ways to approach them and that kind of thing.
There's some interesting possibilities there that also make me think about like ways that a solo game actually removes certain limitations. So for example, I was thinking about how like, well, one of the fun parts of a time loop is that the protagonist gets to do something different this time, but that there's some degree that like we talked in the other Happy Death Day episodes about like how this is a time loop universe where like there are canon events that include lines of dialogue. Like no matter where you are, a character is going to comment on the power going out in the same way. And when as like this idea prompted the idea that like there's certain specific lines of dialogue and stuff that keep coming back up, after you etch them, it's kind of limiting if like the non-protagonist player has to keep doing the same thing a little bit. But if you're doing a solo game, that's fine. And actually it becomes really fun to say, hello, solo player, here are all these Lego bricks you've given yourself. Find ways to slot them into this conversation on this loop. You can do something different, but you know that these are your building blocks of tools that they're going to respond with. And rather than becoming a like really strong limitation on the other person, it becomes an interesting creative restriction on the protagonist player.
Yeah, which is like kind of what I was saying with that would be my question if it was a group game, you know, of like, is that possible? What does that look like?
Can you get it to be a fun creative restriction rather than...
Yeah, which I think would probably lean towards everyone's in a time loop and you have to learn how to work together, kind of going a little bit more towards the Marn end where maybe there's a scene that is a council type thing.
Yeah.
Or there's even like changing the scale of it and having Firebands has, as I'm sure I've said on this podcast because I talk about it all the time, one of the things that Firebands does is that it has a mini game called Solitaire, where when you are not in a scene, you can do Solitaire and then you come back with something to share that you went through. Solitaire, like shifting the focus so that Solitaire is more frequent and a bigger part of the game where everyone's doing their own time loop and then the other scenes are something else is like potentially interesting where it is those council conversations, but that is going in a very different direction.
I also want to borrow the Solitaire emphasis for something slightly different in that I think a thing that I said from the beginning in Happy Death Day is something that I felt very excited about was the idea of like misinterpretations of what's going on in the lives of the side characters and like then finding out more information about what's actually happening. And it's so fun to me to imagine that what Solitaire, that there is like one player who is playing the protagonist, but for all of these other people, every time that you're solitairing when you're not in a scene, you're just fleshing out the lives of these NPCs further and further. And so every time the protagonist revisits them, you have a more sprawling world of their life to draw upon in a way that I think like actually sort of naturally recreates bits of the movie in a way that's really fun.
Yeah, that makes me curious if there's a version of this where, again, apparently a classic on this show, no one is playing the protagonist.
Yes, absolutely. 100%, yeah.
That is definitely a lot harder in some ways to automate in this structure.
Because they are the agent one.
Yeah, it's...
You know, you talked about Firebands being a game that kind of GMs for you. And I'm thinking about, like, what if the mini games codify moments in the protagonist's journey rather than your sort of classic scene types of like a class or a this or a that. But it's more like, you know, we talked about how the courtyard scene, the first time you watch it, you know you're getting a time loop setup scene.
Yeah.
And your time loop setup scene is different than your this is my liberated run through the day. And so the courtyard scene is actually played with any number of different mini games. And what the mini game is saying is this is what the protagonist is like on this time through. And I think that lets the game GM for you in that it tells you here's how the protagonist is going to approach everything you throw at them in this scene because they're doing this type of loop. And I'm actually drawing that a little bit from the listener submission here, because something that I found really interesting that we haven't talked much about yet is that the being murdered would be a scene that is less detailed and can happen at any point in the story. The idea of the murder as a Firebands minigame is like, and this is the one where you're murdered, is so fun to me. And that does a little bit of a good job of saying, like, well, here's what happens meta-narratively in this scene.
Yeah, the part I really like there, or one of the things I really like there is like, you know, she then talks about maybe collecting markers, unlocking new options, eventually breaking the loop, that kind of thing. Playing with the Firebrands or just general minigame structure to say, like, you get 5 scenes or whatever, and then you have to play the murder one.
Yes.
And then letting that get more flexible as you go on, as you are like unlocking things, as you are like maybe solving the central issue in different parts. There could be something that is like, you know, roll a die at the end of every round. If it's above a certain number, murder scene, and you are able to fudge that by tracking something that is giving you a plus or minus to that particular roll.
Totally.
But that is like, I think that the only mandated scene in Firebrands is you have to play solitaire to start, and there might be an end game, or it might just be go around and say what happens. I don't remember in this moment. And I know that other Firebrands games have definitely had some of those like mandated scenes once per round or whatever. But bringing something like that in to have the murder sometimes hit unpredictably and like change based on that is really fun. I think that that could also like, you can enter that montage mode where you're just getting killed repeatedly to knock suspects off the list and that kind of thing. I do think that like, I like what you're saying about solitaire fleshing out the NPCs. I think that I'm still not super compelled by the idea of one person playing a protagonist and everyone playing the NPCs in the Firebrand structure, because I think it just works if everybody is on more even footing. And so I'm really curious, like, if maybe there's a game that is like solitaire, but it's an investigation game, essentially, where someone can like explore the
life
not
of
necessarily
an NPC,
their
but
own.
from a,
yeah.
Yes, 100%. Though I just also want to say, I really love your idea that the no one is playing the protagonist and trying to nail the Firebrandsy game where Firebrands itself is the protagonist is really fun to me.
Yeah, I think it's fun theoretically.
Just really hard.
I think it's pretty much impossible. Open challenge to anyone listening. Please try. But like, one of the huge challenges to me like that I think of right away is that a lot of time loop stuff is based off of really, really small moments. Someone falls down. You can let them fall down, or you can put a pillow under them. It is a series of these really small moments that usually are multiple characters. And so playing any one of those characters in a game like this...
Oh, yeah, if you're only playing one NPC.
You're seeing like 30 seconds of their day.
Totally.
And so I think that if the game is trying to be the protagonist who is looping, your scenes are like a minute, you know, like it would be hard for it to like add up to something. I would be so curious to see if there is a way to approach it that is like giving everybody something that is like fun to do for like the appropriate length of time. But I do think that it is one of the harder what if the protagonist wasn't at the table ones that we have put forward.
100%. And that's a really, really good point and sort of insight into that. One thing that a bunch of the different points of this conversation is reminding me of is Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast, because it is so distinctly a game that has unlocks.
Yeah. Like
literally you're playing and then it's like, okay, flip to this part of the book. You now have access to this chapter that you didn't have before. And because it sits in this weird middle ground of certain prescribed narrative moments, but it depends on the unlocks that you do and characters that already exist that you're sort of playing out their existing story, but you're also doing it yourself. And so I feel like there's stuff there in it's not exactly it's sort of like taking a Yazeba's campaign and compressing it to a session. Yeah, I just feel like there's stuff in that comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good comparison. I think I mean, naturally, the other game that comes up when talking about unlocking content is Triangle Agency.
Yes.
One of the specific things I would love to pull on from Triangle Agency for this is that there is a lot of stuff that is unlocked specifically by asking other people how they think about you. There are like progressions that have you ask, like, do you think I would do X or Y? It isn't about whether you think you would do X or Y. It's about asking your fellow players or characters, possibly. Sometimes the lines there are a little blurry.
Yeah.
Do you think my character would do X or Y? And if you get 3 answers of X, then your abilities or whatever it is progress in a certain way. And similarly for the other one. And so you lack a lot of control over some of the progression that you're doing, which I think is fucking fantastic. And I know that a lot of people struggle with it. Yes. I think that it's one of the coolest things that Triangle Agency does. And Triangle Agency does a lot of cool things. And
that's a mini game also. Answering those questions feels like part of, at least, could be of a mini game.
Yeah. And I think that feels powerful here because of, you know, partially what you were saying of like the thing about learning about other people's lives and about like the self-improvement narrative of loops and that kind of thing. Like asking an NPC, do you think that I would help you? Or like not as direct as that, but just being like trying to ask, what do you think I would do? And unlocking things based off of that, based off of like, and so like as your behavior changes,
yes,
it can funnel you towards things where like if you're consistently getting the negative answer, whatever that is, you're unlocking stuff that is like more complicated. You're unlocking like, oh look, you're getting murdered more often. There are more suspects. That's the other thing. Your suspect list keeps growing because you keep pissing people off. But as you manage to like change your behavior or whatever, if this is the prescribed narrative, which is its own conversation, but like then you start unlocking the cool, here's how you break the time loop. Here's how you actually get out of this. Like, I think that there's a lot there of just how people perceive you, how you perceive other people. There could even be elements of like, to tie into your thing about being wrong about other people, there could be aspects here where the question is about somebody and you both have to answer the same thing. And if you don't, then something happens. And if you start answering the same thing because you've learned enough about each other or whatever, then you're getting towards let's break the time loop kind of thing. Fitting all of that into Firebands, if we're still building off of that, is definitely a big escalation of Firebands. I don't think it's impossible. It could be its own new thing. It could also be fit into this sort of like mini game thing. I think that would be awesome. I really like this direction.
Yeah, really rich design vein.
Yeah, Jasmine, this is awesome. If this is something you are interested in doing, I really think you should pursue this because I think this is powerful. Our next submission is from Michael. Let's listen to this.
The game structure that I'm imagining for this is a solve your own murder mystery adventure module game. So there'll be different possible mysteries you can solve. It might well be best as one GM, one player, I'm not sure. But each module comes with a whole bunch of nodes that correspond to the scenes that you're going to kind of go through over the course of the day. And there are more than you can fit in on any one particular loop. There's going to be a set number of actions you can do on a loop. But each node will have a clock associated with it. So that as you make progress and kind of take action and succeed in those scenes, you know, eventually you'll fill up the clock and then you can choose, okay, I think I've got all the information out of this one. I don't need to do it anymore at all. Or you can say it still needs to be part of the loop, but I've mastered the scene. We don't need to spend time on it. I don't need to roll dice or draw cards now, whatever. And then, you know, that allows you to go further down a particular kind of route of investigation or to take a different tack entirely and to use your actions for future loops on different stuff. The mechanic that I'm most interested in layering on top of that is kind of like a Blaze in the Dark style flashback, where once you've got a whole load of information from all these different avenues, you can go back to what was originally just a basic introductory information gathering scene and say, I want to have more agency over this. I want to proactively take action in this earlier scene and make real progress towards solving the mystery. And that's 90 seconds.
Oh, I know that feeling. And that's 90 seconds is such a feeling. So real for that.
This is awesome.
It's
is
sick.
so
it's so fucking sick.
Good. Even just like I was having that little like pew 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 in my brain, like connections being made moment so early. Even just the idea of it having these like different modules that you're playing together with that like one player, one GM structure, the thing of like different nodes that you're going through that have clocks that you're filling up. That is such a clever way of making it rewarding to go through the loops and making it rewarding to like close one out because you've learned all you can from it. That's great.
You know what that immediately reminded of? This idea brought me to two things immediately, both of which we've maybe discussed in the podcast, one of which definitely, which is Citizen Sleeper.
Oh, shit. Yeah, of course.
It literally, like, if we take a day in Citizen Sleeper to be a loop, and then you go to a location and you slot in dice to progress the clock to move that story forward and learn a little bit more about what's happening at that place. Like, this is just Citizen Sleeper, but it's all the same day. And which I say / positive, like, yeah. And all the possibilities that come with taking Citizen Sleeper, which itself was explicitly Forged in the Dark, but as a CRPG, and like re-TTRPGing it in this player GM duo setup is so fun and like such a rich vein for a time loop. Really smart.
I just need to re-listen to the last few seconds because I genuinely was like so excited by what was said before that I missed. Z literally said like, and the thing I'm most excited about, and I was like immediately all those. I'm still all thinking. So I'm just going to re-listen to the last like 30 seconds so that I can comment on what Z was most excited about.
100%.
The mechanic that I'm most interested in layering on top of that is kind of like a Blaze in the Dark style flashback, where once you've got a whole load of information from all these different avenues, you can go back to what was originally just a basic introductory information gathering scene and say, I want to have more agency over this. I want to proactively take action in this earlier scene and make real progress towards solving the mystery.
Okay, yes. So this is also so clever. This is like, you're going through all of these scenes, you're gathering information. How do you make that satisfying on a micro level? And how do you give that big, satisfying final finish of like, okay, you did it. You did all the investigating. You went through all the stuff. Now you have to solve the basic problem. This is a like, this answers one of the things that I remember bringing up in one of the episodes being like, how do you make it satisfying to fail repeatedly?
Yes.
And then succeed. Like, how do you make it feel good to know that you can't possibly have the right answer until you do, which I think is like, depending on the structure, it can be answered in a lot of different ways. I think that this is a really, really cool, clever way to do it, of like, you do this introductory scene and then my impression is like, you kind of leave that one alone for a while. You like go and you do all your weird investigations, you fit in as many as you can, and then you go back and you actually like, I bet that you probably relive the introductory scene a couple times. It's the, you know, the campus,
yes.
the campus walk and that kind of thing. And then being armed with all of the information that you've gathered so far and finally conquering that is awesome. That sounds so satisfying. That sounds like such a good feeling.
This accurately captures the sort of, well, now that I know, I can do things so well. I'm also thinking about what it would be like to like lay that into some really explicit sort of traditional gaming mechanics where it's like on your first loops, you're like rolling to do stuff. Mm-hmm. And then on your later loops, after you've completed certain things, you can be like, I'm going to make that die a 7 because I know what happens when that die is a 7. Yeah. Like I've had the die be a 7 before. Like anytime you roll a result, you can reproduce that result and you have to keep doing that until you have results you want. It's so fun to me.
There's something I love in that is specifically because you called out a specific number. I love the idea of you go through the scene 3 times and you roll 3 different things and then 3 slightly different things happen. One of them is a failure. The idea that sometimes you realize the failure, I mean, this should never be the case because narratively, like, failure should be a failure and you'd like, you know, this is its whole own conversation of like, what a failure and what a success even means. So maybe it's not as binary as that. Maybe it's not a failure or success kind of thing, but like that you can choose a suboptimal option because it set you up well later.
Yes.
Which would probably be a mixed success if we're going for that. But like, that's awesome. And that you're like recording that and then going like, okay, well this time, yes, I'm going to do the 4. I'm not going to roll a die. I'm going to do the 4. Maybe that's even part of the clock. That's part of the reason that you only have so many scenes or nodes, as you said, that fit in, is it's like you can roll a die 10 times. You're and so when you don't have to, I guess that was kind of in the message of like, oh, well, I did this already, so I don't need to roll a thing, whatever.
Yeah, and the idea, I'm so delighted now thinking about, like, it is functionally the same, but the idea of, like, okay, this clock has 6 parts, but I'm not going from 1 to 6. I'm rolling a die, finding out what a 4 is, and then going, okay, well, the 4 on this clock is filled up. Let's try out the 2 this time. Until you have like pieced together all the ways this could go is so fun. And something else from the very beginning of this was the idea that it's very adventure module-y.
Yeah.
And it immediately called me back to something I'm pretty sure I already referenced in this series, which is Sam Sorensen's Mothership module Time After Time, which is you've got a dungeon map that is a calendar of a week with things that are happening in at certain times that you can enter and exit out of as a time traveler. And so I'm just seeing the GM having a module that is these nodes and also the ways they can go. I'm seeing D8 tables of like, here are 8 variations of this interaction that the player, and like, I would want those to be like kernels, right? Not everything the GM can or will do, but just like, here are 8 ways this character can react, and then the GM using that as the spark. And then once you've played out a scene, how the player and GM role play it at the table becomes the canon of... I'm almost seeing a table that has blank space on it in the adventure module, where like, here's your prompt, now fill out a paragraph about what happens so that when you do it again, you can reproduce that paragraph.
Yeah, totally.
Some challenging adventure module writing, but...
Yes, very. I was going to say that it sounds frustrating to have to, you know, if you have this 6-part clock that you're not progressing linearly, that you're trying to roll 1 through 6 at any point. I was going to say that sounds frustrating, but I think that it actually could, if that's the direction you go, fit in well to those montage moments where you're like, okay, on this loop, I am going to burn all of my dice on just figuring out what's going on in this scene, right? Like, and so you're sort of doing that, like, very focused, this is my whole thing. All of my dice are going into this so that I can try and fill this clock in. If that's the direction, I think could fit well. I think that it would be a balancing act for sure.
That has me also thinking about stuff we were already talking about earlier in certain ways, which is getting more control as you go on.
Yeah.
Because your first loop, you don't know you're in a time loop. You're rolling randomly. Your second loop, you know you're in a time loop, so you're going to do something slightly different. So you can add 1 or minus 1 if you end up on the same roll. And then by your last loop, you know a bunch of different ways this can go, which means you can dodge and weave, set your die result to anything you want, and then find out what happens. And so the idea that like you're gaining access to more tools for manipulating that feels like it also actually captures some of what is the case in movies like this.
Yeah, and I think that could easily be tied to what Michael was saying of like, you know, you master a specific node, you like check one off entirely and that kind of thing. You could somehow tie it to that progression of like when you start figuring stuff out, which I love. This is another one. Both of these messages are ones where I'm like, yes, yep, work on this. Do this one. Thank you.
Yeah, make this whole game, please. I'm so intrigued also from a module writing perspective, how much you can link the different nodes and make things later dependent on things earlier. Like, one of the real challenges of module writing that has, like, I tend to be a fan of modules that are very sandboxy and very give me a character and a motivation and a bunch of different places and connected people, but don't tell me what happens.
Mm-hmm.
If you need to be able to play out this ordered node structure, how do you write a module that is flexible and satisfying at the same time? Feels like such an interesting design challenge.
Yeah, is part of what you're reacting to there the idea that these modules would be explicitly linearly connected, like you would play one then the other?
Oh, no, it was more in what I was describing. It sounded like there were, like, nodes had an order to them, and how to make it so that choices you make earlier in the day matter to things that happen later without, like, exploding the amount of module content that you have to write to a bunch of... I guess... in some ways, maybe it's actually the opposite of what I am thinking, in that I was like, one of the challenges of module writing that does a little, mandates more than just the, here's a character, here's a motivation, here's a situation they're in, is that, like, you end up writing a whole bunch of content that players don't see. It's like if you take branch A, then you just don't see any of branch B. And I guess this doesn't introduce problems, it solves them, because the players do get to do A and B, which is not usually the case in a module. I think
Totally.
I think my usual pushback to linear modules was inventing a problem that doesn't exist in this format that actually fucks, that rules, actually.
Uh-huh. Yeah, there's certainly still elements of, like, of course you'll have to, as you get later in the day, adjust things and put nodes in different orders based on where you're exploring and all that kind of thing, which is just, yeah, you're going to have to do that in running module stuff anyway. And it is interesting to think of, like, how does the game have to react to that? Like, does it have, like, what allowances does it have to have, especially if we're having the, like, you need to explore all 6 paths of this thing, which we don't necessarily. I just want to make sure that's clear that Michael was not saying, like, like, you have a clock, you're progressing it, but you're not necessarily, like, dictating something from that. Like, it was a little
100%.
bit more freeform there. And, like, yeah, it's interesting just how do things react? What does that mean? What does that look like? What flexibility needs to be built in to the game for that? My curiosity with the modules is, like, whether this literally is built to essentially be a campaign of, like, this person keeps getting caught in time loops and that kind of thing. Like, and so, like, is that because there are quote unquote sequels, or is it, like, does that then become, there are stories where somebody is doing a lot of time loops for various reasons. One thing that could be interesting to me is almost a little bit of a, like, time war, how you lost the time war situation, where we are having somebody whose job it is to sort of, like, your job is go into this time loop and unknot it. Like, we have found,
you love when there's time agents.
Yeah, like, we found a knot in time. Go and fucking, what's the old sci-fi show where a guy is different people? He jumps between bodies.
Is it Quantum Leap?
I think so, yeah.
I say that I love B sci-fi, and yet I can't. Yes, it's Quantum Leap.
Yeah, that you're functionally quantum leaping around, that it's sort of a quantum leap person of interest, where you're like, we keep finding this person who is being killed through time loops. We've found a whole bunch of them.
Oh,
go save them by being them and figuring out what happened.
Yes.
And maybe there's a little bit of iZombie here as well, where, like, you're not just playing your protagonist, you are being influenced by who this person is. I don't know how much that is true in Quantum Leap. I'm not super familiar. I don't know if I don't know how the identity
Also,
of everything
Marathon
works.
2026, where the shell that you choose influences the personality you exhibit while you inhabit the shell. Like, I'm so here with you.
That kind of thing is really, that could add a sort of, like, broader framework to why you would have multiple modules that you are working through in a way that I think could be really, really fun.
Quantum Leap stars Scott Bakula, and I gotta say, I know him as Star Trek Enterprise captain, and I thought Bakula was his character name. His character's name is Jonathan Archer, which is way less of a Star Trek name than his actor's name, Scott Bakula, with a K. This has all been, I've been sitting here waiting to jump in with the fact that, like, I didn't read this at all in the way that either you did or just had fun doing, which is that, like, I read this as fiasco playsets, where it's like, okay, well, which theming of this game do we want to play? And they are not connected at all. But the idea of making there be a connection to them is so fun.
Yeah, I was basically suggesting that there could be a reason to do it, because the alternate being like, I think specifically for me, it's in part because it is a 2-person game that, like, it feels, and this might not be true, I'm sure there are duos of people who would just like to sit down and do a time loop game together with slightly different theming multiple times that feel no need to connect them together. But for me, I think I would approach a repeated duet game very differently than I would approach something like doing different fiasco play sets, which I think I could do forever, once a week, probably. And so that made me want to reach towards a reason to, like, how do we link these together? How do we make it rewarding and narratively cogent to, like, do it again and again and again? Just as, like, how do we reward this structure at a higher level, even for the creator?
And I'm so charmed by the quantum leap time knots in the form of, like, also starting to think about what the meta narrative is of, like, there's some force in the universe that is causing people to get stuck in time loops that we're cleaning up after, but you're also but you are progressing towards solving this larger mystery as you are solving all the individual mysteries is also really fun. Just like, what is causing a bunch of people to get stuck in time loops? What do stories A, B, and C? Maybe it's not even built into the modules. You have to figure out and play. What does module A, B, and C that you pick of many, many options? How are they alike? What did these 3 characters come into 4th dimensional contact with that made them all get stuck in time loops is so fun.
Yeah, I at first was not super into that because I was thinking of it as more of a, like, basically a monster of the week, like, what's our excuse to do this time thing, and, like, not necessarily interested in prescribing a broader narrative to it, but adding something that is essentially asking you to do some red string.
Yes.
Like,
yeah,
how do we find the connections between these people? I think that could also be really fun. I think it is, like, definitely has its own different challenges, obviously, for, like, how much you want to, like, it feels almost like something that I would not necessarily want to design, but just leave the room for. But I don't think that has to be the answer. I think this is just one of those things that it's like, where are you interested in putting your energy? Because I think that would probably be really satisfying, but might be more satisfying if we just let the GM and player, like, let them do it, let them figure that
100%.
out without necessarily prescribing a lot of it. I don't know. There's a lot of room there for, like, that's also, like, there are different types of Monster of the Week show, right? There is Monster of the Week that is literally basically unserialized, and then there is the much more, like, we are working towards a bigger thing. For me, I think my pull to that would not necessarily be, why is this happening, and just taking that as a fact, like, having there be a certain, like, assumption of, like, well, we know this is the thing that happens, but, like, yeah, we are investigating a specific person or creature or something, figuring out what these people have in common, not to stop it, because that's impossible, because this is just a fact of life, but just to, like,
just understand,
you know, understand it, or maybe stop this version of it. Like, we're like, well, this one is a rogue time traveler who is sending ripples out, and so we will put them in time jail.
And that's season 1.
But this one is just a big space-time whale that is floating around. We can't do anything about that, but we can try and make sure that its natural habitat is free of time clutter so that it stops accidentally murdering people.
Viditya, you heard it here. Space whales are not enough. It needs to be a space-time whale next time.
Yep. We're escalating.
Yeah. Context here. Space Between Stars, Viditya game, you have to define what the space whales are like in your setting. And in this game, you have to define what your space-time whales are like.
You don't, but you can. It can be one of the
true.
things.
Yes. God.
Yeah, again, this is fucking fantastic. I love this. I loved both of these. Thank you so much to Jasmine and Michael for writing in. These are both really good ideas. And I think that this series, I think, has a lot of fruitful stuff for a lot of like weird one-shots and small
Yes.
campaigns and that kind of thing, which is great because I love those types of games. So there's a lot in here that is exciting to potentially be picked through and developed on. Brief interruption from Futurist Zeta, who has their window open and it's pouring rain, and that is simply not something I'm going to change for the audio quality because it's nice for me personally. In the Looper episode, I read out the examples that I posted in our call for submissions to the mechanical mailbag, and I want to do that here as well because I think they're fun. The example pitches I gave were a Monster Hearts alike of unstable time and unstable relationships, a table of classic campus activities that can be used as a reference to ground each loop, and a dread hack where you're trying to solve your own murder before the tower falls. Maybe you want to run with one of those for the game jam that starts today. I don't know. This should be a game jam. So I think, yeah, that pretty much wraps us up. Jess, do you have anything you want to direct people towards?
Yeah, you can find my games on my itch.io, jumpgategames.itch.io. I don't often mention you can buy my physical games places. Indie Press Revolution is a great place to get those. If you check out the Jumpgate Games Indie Press Revolution page, that's a great place to get my games. You can also find me on social media as at jessfrom.online or at jumpgategames, at jumpgate.games. Many, many places.
Wonderful. You can find me on Bluesky at potatochips.gaygothvibes.online. You can find my work generally at gaygothvibes.online. You can listen to Folio, which is my multi-guest solo game actual play podcast where I have multiple people play the same solo game and I edit all of the discrete playthroughs together to put them in conversation with each other. And you should back the Haunted Table Patreon to get access to the playtest version of The House Edge, which is our time loop fist triangle agency crossover that is really, really good. And we will be crowdfunding this year to get into print. It is really good. We've been putting a lot of development into it, and talking about time loop games is just a lot of my life right now. You can also support this podcast financially on Patreon. You can do that, and then it's done, and you've done it, and you can do stuff like vote on movies that we will cover. Remember, again, follow us on Bluesky at thissshouldbeaga.me and join the Discord at discord.thissshouldbeaga.me to figure out when we are putting out the call for these mechanical mailbags. We would really like to keep doing these as we go forward. Love expanding the conversation, love hearing from people. These ideas were awesome and not really something that we approached in our other episodes, which is really exciting to me. I think that's it. Thank you to Cris Viana for our logo. Thank you to Nicky Flowers for our theme song. This has been This Should Be a Game, a podcast about the moment. This should be a game.
This should be a game.